said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
Listen to all this, eh?
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
Dang it all, I really thought we were done fielding legal shenanigans. I guess nothing ought to surprise us by now. On April 16th, 2015, Allison Tiemann and the Honey Badger Brigade, founded by 3 women and involving a highly diverse staff of volunteers, creators, and lovers of free expression, opened a booth at the Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo. The expo also hosted a feminist panel titled Women into Comics. Allison Tiemann and Sage Gerard attended, and in response to a question about men's rights activists, Allison requested and was given the panel moderator's permission to speak. She did so briefly in relation to the topic brought up by the panelists.
But that's just it. What had happened? At what point did all of a sudden did it become a dirty thing for women to be into this stuff? Like, in the eyes of so many of these men.
I guess nothing ought to surprise us by now. On April 16th, 2015, Allison Tiemann and the Honey Badger Brigade, founded by 3 women and involving a highly diverse staff of volunteers, creators, and lovers of free expression, opened a booth at the Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo. The expo also hosted a feminist panel titled Women into Comics. Allison Tiemann and Sage Gerard attended, and in response to a question about men's rights activists, Allison requested and was given the panel moderator's permission to speak. She did so briefly in relation to the topic brought up by the panelists.
But that's just it. What had happened? At what point did all of a sudden did it become a dirty thing for women to be into this stuff? Like, in the eyes of so many of these men's rights activist types, or...
Would you like us to field that question?
Huh?
Would you like us to field that question?
Sure, go for it.
Because I am a men's rights activist, so you can hate on me. The reason why I don't like feminism is because you promote this idea that women are defined by being victims. If you look at the context of all of your issues, men also face considerable problems as well. And they need to be brought into the story, and not just for men's sake, because this hides men's vulnerability, also for the sake of challenging the notion that women are defined as victims.
The full discussion is linked in the low bar. If you check it out, you can hear that there was no conflict, only a brief exchange of thoughts. A small contingent of feminist supporters, however, later claimed that Allison derailed the conversation. The next morning, the expo forcibly evicted Allison and the brigade, despite the group operating well within the rules of the expo and its policies of conduct. We were not given a chance to dispute the alleged complaints. The organization violated its own stated policy in the process and released conflicting claims regarding its reasons for our removal, defaming us with false accusations of disruptive conduct to rationalize its decision to censor the group's views. These accusations included some claims published in a Mary Sue article and subsequently promoted by the expo as the reason behind the expulsion. The article, whose writer never contacted Allison or any of the other Badgers for clarification or explanation, presented a clearly satirical joke as a literal statement of fact, and included statements even their own commenters questioned, falsely accused the group of deceiving the expo, and also of harassment and disruptive behavior. Those accusations were repeated, and that article cited, by various media sources following the incident. In response, the brigade pursued legal action against both Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo and the Mary Sue. After initially serving notice of legal action to the defendants, we ran across an interesting obstacle: an odd network of legal entities surrounding Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo. To complicate matters, upon evicting the group, the Expo had blocked Allison's access to their contract with her, making it impossible to refer to it to find the correct name. The suit was originally filed against the federal corporate entity bearing nearly the same name as Calgary Expo, and founded by the Expo's founder. We received a response stating that we had contacted the wrong person, followed by the argument that if the entity we contacted were the entity responsible for the Calgary Comics and Entertainment Expo, the Expo staff's actions were valid. Following notification on behalf of that entity that it was not the Expo's parent company, we re-examined the various companies associated with it, all registered under the same owner's name, and figured that the correct entity was one with a deceptively non-corporate sounding name containing the word committee, and which was not federally registered, but which was listed on receipts we had for the Honey Badger booth registration. Due to the confusion, it was necessary to apply for an order granting leave to amend the civil claim, and a conference call was scheduled to allow the defendants the opportunity to contest the application. Following this short conference call in January 2016, during which one defendant's representative put the call on hold and played circus music across the line, the plaintiff's application was approved. The judge granted broad approval, in fact, also allowing the plaintiff to fix 2 typographical errors with which the Mary Sue had taken substantial issue. On June 20th, 2016, the Honey Badger Brigade was advised by Calgary Expo International Incorporated that it had misled the Alberta Provincial Court by advising a judge at a June 2nd, 2016 pretrial that Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo Incorporated was not the corporate entity the Honey Badger Brigade needed to sue. Subsequently, its lawyer, Elmer Chu, advised that he did not have the correct information before him at the pretrial conference and that it was the proper party to sue. In other words, the January conference call was unnecessary. The defendants tried and failed to get the suit thrown out prior to any hearing. Then they took up the initial court date arguing for a summary dismissal, including in their arguments an extended rehashing of their complaints about typos and an attempt to blame the plaintiff for the defendant's deception of the court regarding the name issue. Due to the defendant's extensive quibbling, the summary dismissal was the only issue the court was able to rule on during the initial 1.5-day hearing in January of 2017. In November of 2017, the group returned to court to hear the opposing attorney attempt yet again to argue for summary dismissal and attempt to get Allison's evidence dismissed out of hand. Finally, Allison got the chance to give her testimony. After hearing Allison's testimony, the defendants began asking to discuss out-of-court settlements, beginning with threats and cajoling, but eventually begging for a meeting. They initially displayed receptiveness, verbally agreeing to Allison's terms, but over the next month, settlement talks went nowhere and ended with the defendants threatening a frivolous defamation suit. We contacted the clerk to request new dates for the continuance of the trial. They have informed us that their earliest available dates are in February of 2019. Our legal agent, Harry Capito, has sent a politely worded request to the judge presiding over this matter to select an earlier date. We are awaiting word from the court. This is a trial update as of February 8th, 2018. Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 24. Speaking of accountability, court stuff. A couple of reminders. If you want to join the chat on YouTube, please go to the Badger Livestreams channel. If YouTube is experiencing platform malfunction syndrome and it won't let you listen, we're also on Twitch and on Facebook. If you want to be sure you'll always be able to catch our live streams, even if YouTube decides to throw us in the gulag for wrongthink, or if you just want to catch our show in its audio format, remember to go to badgerfeed.com and register to receive notifications. Also, we do have a fundraiser up to get our witnesses back to the courtroom for one more round against our opponent's fancy-schmancy New York lawyer. You can find it at badgerfeed.com as the featured project. Our panel tonight consists of that adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, and Woozle Slayer, Karen Strawn. So guys, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you Bob?
I'm actually not a follower of Bob, so I'll take a sworn affirmation.
Oh, that's it. Out of the Discord. Out of the Discord.
Rather than swearing upon Bob, I will swear upon my honor.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
There we go. But everybody then, but our legal opponents will believe us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay. So this we're like, this show is the update. The update. Okay. So I've been waiting to disclose a lot of these details, in terms of, and these are details that wouldn't even necessarily be known to people in the courtroom who were observing, but are known to me. And one of them is that it was just like a week, maybe 10 days before the trial was scheduled, I was served a notice to attend by Elmer Chu. And it said that essentially I was going to be called to testify for the defense, and I would be paid $100 per day, witness allowance fee, for the full 3 days of the trial, which totaled $100. And then they asked me if I wanted to pick up that $100 at their office, or if I wanted it sent to an address. So, noting a discrepancy in their arithmetic, I sent them a possibly tart response, that their arithmetic was off, and that my witness allowance fee, and I went and I looked it up, and I actually found that $100 per day is the allowance given to expert witnesses. So I'm not an expert witness. So just a witness is $50 a day. So I was like, okay, well, it's $50 a day. You still owe me more than $100 for the 3 days. But since I don't live in Calgary, you also owe me travel and accommodations and a reasonable amount for meals. And I looked up a sort of a schedule, right, of such fees and compensations that were applicable in, I think, 2015, something like that. And I essentially said, I will happily accept my $996.64 at my home address, and I gave it to them. And then I didn't hear back for like a week, and it was getting like, it was the Friday before the trial. I was going to drive out Sunday, be there for the Monday to do, I don't know, like just hang out and get settled and all of that. And then the trial was going to start on the Tuesday. So the Friday I bumped Elmer Chu's assistant, and I said, can you please advise as to whether you're sending me this almost $1,000 that you owe me, and in order to appear at this trial that you're demanding that I appear at. And then I got in my car on Sunday. I didn't hear back, and then I got in my car on Sunday, and I drove down to Calgary, and I got to Calgary, and then late in the afternoon on Sunday, I get an email not from Mr. Chu's legal assistant, but from Mr. Chu himself, on a Sunday, no less, in the late afternoon, saying, you're released from your requirement to testify on our behalf. And because I was really scathing about their stupidity in the whole thing, right? And then he said, you can return the funds we disperse to you at our office or whatever, or in person, and or mail them. And I said, okay, well, please let me know where the $0.00 you've given me needs to go. Do I need to hand it over in person at your office, or can I put it in a registered letter? Right. So I was being a real bitch, right? And because they hadn't released any funds to me at all. But so essentially, I think what happened there was they saw that I was on our witness list, and they were like, okay, well, she's on the plaintiff's witness list, so we don't need to pay her no $1,000 to attend this trial and get her on the stand. So yeah, like, fuck that shit. We'll release her. We don't owe her any money. And yeah, and then Harry asked me on Monday, is there anything that you could testify to that somebody else couldn't also testify to? And I was like, not really. And he said, well, I think I'd rather have you sitting at the plaintiff's table assisting me. So we'll just drop you from our witness list. And so I got to sit in the courtroom because I'm not the defense witness anymore, and I'm no longer a plaintiff's witness. I'm just an observer and an assistant to Harry, helping him identify what on the page is actually a URL. Oh, that was fucking hilarious. But so, and Chu was like really not pleased with that. He essentially, after the business was over, of all of the evidence that he was contesting its inclusion, he said, before everything started, and when the judge had said, anyone who's going to be a witness, you need to leave the courtroom. And then Chu stood up and said, there's only one plaintiff, but there's two people at plaintiff's table. And and Harry was like, oh, this is Karen Strawn. She's here to assist me in keeping notes and blah, blah, blah. Right. And she knows the case. And Harry was, Elmer Chu was like, is she his staff? And he says, no, but she's been working on this case with us he puts on he has this way of speaking. She's been working on this case with us for 2 years now, and she knows it backwards and forwards, all of the details. And I would beg the court's indulgence to allow her to stay and assist me, right? And the judge allowed it. And yeah, Elmer was not pleased about that. But that was kind of the first really thing that just kind of was like, oh, that's good. I get to stay. And then, okay, so opening statements, right? Plaintiff gets to go first. And Harry he gets up and he says, Your Honor, and I'm paraphrasing all of this from memory. Your Honor, I don't think I'm going to waive my opportunity to make an opening statement. You're familiar with the details of this case from the motion for summary dismissal that you heard in February of this year, or January, or whenever it was, right? And, you understand what the case is about, and I don't want to waste your time. Okay.
That was the best line he could have possibly said.
Yeah, you know why? Because of the other thing that Chu did that was a complete miscalculation. Because here's the thing. The morning of, when we arrived, the court clerks were losing their minds, right? They were absolutely losing their minds. They had no idea where to send people. Everything was completely fucked up because the motion for summary dismissal was heard by Judge Day. And he had given us an option of, we had half a day left way back in January. We had half a day left. You can start the trial now and continue with me in December, or you can go with a different judge in November for 3 consecutive days. And of course, it just made more sense logistically to go with those 3 consecutive days, because the only reason why we would start the trial and sort of have this big, long continuance interruption would be to get our out-of-town witnesses on the stand. And there's no way that you can put them on the stand before Allison testifies, because she has an entitlement to be in the courtroom, and she can't be sent out. And therefore, the judge would be able to make some inference that her subsequent testimony might have been tainted by listening to the other witnesses. So she had to testify first. Absolutely 100%. And so there was no point in starting back in January for that half day and then go another 2 days. No, 3 full days in front of a different judge. Fine, right? Okay, but the morning of the trial, and we were all under the impression this was gonna be heard in front of Judge Laura Burt. I think her name was Laura Burt.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and so everything was prepared by both sides. Anything that was prepared in advance was prepared to be presented in front of a different judge. Okay, and so we go in there, and the court clerks, there's this one guy wandering around with a file folder full of documents, and he's just like, I went down to like room 215 and they sent me over here, and then this guy is telling me, no, go back to 215, and I don't know where I'm supposed to go. And I'm just like, he was just there to do some kind of logistical thing where, you know, like becoming an executor of a will or something like that, right? Like just him in front of a judge getting a rubber stamp. And he had nowhere to go because none of the clerks knew where to send him because everything was thrown into chaos. So, and we only found out at like, I don't know, like 9:30 or 9:45 or something, that it was actually going to be Judge Day who was going to be hearing this case, right? And we asked afterwards, like at the end of the day or maybe at the lunch break or something like that, we asked the clerk, did Judge Day actually request this? Like, is that why everything was up in arms, is because Judge Day traded dockets with Judge Burt so that he could actually be on this case? And he said, yeah, right? So Judge Day, so here's the thing. Chu's opening statements, which he had, you know, written down at least in point form or bullet points or whatever, right? On a piece of paper, right? They were prepared the night before, I'm guessing, to be presented to Judge Burt. And the first thing that he opens with is, okay, he opened with the, oh, you know, the Calgary Expo is a family affair, and won't someone think of the children? You know, they're exposed to all of these horrible, awful, really bad, no good people, right? Okay, he opened with that. But then he moved immediately on into reiterating every single argument he made in his motion for summary dismissal. Okay, and then the judge, okay, you can see him getting more and more annoyed as Chu is rattling off all the same arguments. And then the judge says, are we actually going to rehash all of this stuff that I've already ruled on? Okay.
That was so fantastic.
Okay, but here's the thing. It would be one thing. It would be one level of impertinence to actually do that if Chu had prepared those statements for Judge Day. But what Chu had prepared his statements for was Judge Burt. So he had prepared his statements essentially to ask a different judge to overrule Judge Day's rulings, right? And you could just see that Judge Day saw this. And the moment that, like, I'm describing this to my 15-year-old, right? And I said, but think of it. Chu prepared those arguments, those opening statements, to be presented in front of Judge Burt. And Sam thought about it for like 5 seconds and went, oh, fuck, no, he didn't. Right? Like, he just immediately understood all the implications, right? But somehow Chu was completely oblivious to it. So Judge Day kind of gives him a spanking, right? Says, you know, are we going to rehash all the things that I've already ruled on? Because, you know, I'm really not interested in that, right? And then Chu says, if I could beg the court's indulgence, okay, because he's already pissed off the judge. So he's like, okay, I think I could piss off the judge some more. He says, if I could beg the court's indulgence, if my client, Mr. Icebrook, could add some of his own statements to the opening statements, if he could have a few words, if he could speak a few words as part of the opening statements.
Oh, he's come such a long way.
He's come all the way from New York. right? Okay, and it's just such a shame that he even has to be here. Could you please, if it please the court, allow him, take a break from procedure and protocol and indulge my client in this way? Okay, so then the judge, he says, he directly addresses Icebrook, who's sitting at the defense table. At this point, he's sitting there with Henkelman and Chu. Okay, so he directly addresses Icebrook, and he says, Mr. Icebrook, and then he says Icebrook, and then they go back and forth over the pronunciation of the name a little bit, and it's like the judge is kind of, it's almost like kind of an ice-breaking thing, right? Between, like setting the guy off of his guard and all of this, and then they hash out the pronunciation and the spelling of the name, and then the judge says, well, I know you're from the United States, and I know they do things differently down there. I watch TV too. But in Canada, it's customary to stand when addressing the court. So right to his feet, Icebrook shoots, right? And then the judge says, Mr. Icebrook, in what capacity are you attending my court today? And he says, I'm a representative of the client, Mary Sue. And the judge says, so you're here as the client? And he's like, yeah. Not as counsel. And he's like, yeah. And he says, so what are you asking me here? In what capacity are you wanting to attend this trial? I mean, are you going to want to cross-examine witnesses? Exactly what's your role here?
Yeah, we don't allow people to wear two hats in Alberta.
Oh no, two pairs of pants.
Oh, is that what he said? Oh, okay.
Are you trying to wear two pairs of pants in my courtroom? and then he says, you're here as the client, Mr. Icebrook. You have counsel. It's your counsel's job to address the court on your behalf. You may be seated, sir. Or no, he said, take your seat, sir. And bam, down Icebrook goes. So it's like they got off on so much the wrong foot with this judge. Like I could not have, if I was trying to write a piece of fiction where I was determined to portray one side as incompetent with no common sense or judgment whatsoever, no ability to assess their own situation, no self-awareness whatsoever, right? I could not have, I mean, this, like, there's a difference between fiction and reality. Fiction has to make sense. None of what Chu did in those opening statements made sense. It was completely, like, I was just blown away by how he pissed off the judge, and then he went and like pissed off the judge more. And that's after wasting the entire morning. I don't know, Prim, I don't know if you want to speak to this. After Chu wasting the entire morning, or 2 hours of the morning over the contested evidence. Oh, she has evidence that she didn't submit to us on time. Therefore, I'm going to, you either use my evidence binder, which doesn't include 90% of what she submitted on time, or I'm going to make her go through every single piece of evidence in her binder, not just the contested stuff she wants to enter in, and make sure that that was entered in on time, and she'll have to show me email evidence and the whole bit, right? I mean, so that was 2 hours of time wasted to confirm that, yeah, everything in the binders was submitted on time.
Well, the thing that I really wanted to comment on it, because it was that first day that they went over the evidence, but one of the first things that happened in the morning, and Allison's already spoken to this, so I assume that it's fair game. She said it in her own video. One of the first things
the threat
that Chu says to her is, when I win this case, I'm going to come after, I hear you have a piece of property in where you live, and I'm going to come after it. And then it was just awful. And she's clearly upset by this statement. It was just a really unkind thing to say, obviously trying to stir her up. But the difference in the demeanor after they go through that book of evidence, because who was it? It was Chu, it was Henkelman, Allison, and Harry went in that room, right? And it was Icebrook too, right?
Yeah.
So everybody was in that room, and then when they came out of that room, oh my goodness!
Oh, it was completely different. Well,
Henkelman looked like his soul had been sucked out through his nostrils.
I'm just looking at, you know, like his threat, and Harry was completely unfazed by that. Allison was deeply upset. She was like, "They're going to come after the Badger Cave. They're going to take the Badger Cave away." And like, we had to wait until Chu went away, right, in order to explain to her it's just money, right? They aren't going to hold ownership of some building in buttfuck Saskatchewan, right? Okay, they just know that you have $25,000 worth of equity in your name in that building that they can actually come after, and the judge would actually be able to say, if he ruled in their favor and awarded them costs, that yes, she's capable of paying $25,000, right? That's all it is. It's just money. They're not going to take the Badger Cave. You're not going to lose nothing. It's just an intimidation tactic, right? And so, I mean, but he was a real fucking giant cunt. He was a cunt all morning. He was a cunt right up until, pardon my French, okay, this is how he was behaving, and I'm sure that this was, I mean, like, lawyers do this all the time. They're like, okay, I want to intimidate someone, I'll behave like a cunt, right? This is just
I know, it's just, if he's
part of the job description, you know, it's a hat that you wear, right?
Yeah. But if he's saying he's gonna sue, like, whatever, Allison again for what Brian for what Brian said, then I'm sure.
I absolutely 100% said that he was like a part of the female anatomy. Like, no. But when you're looking at it, like, it was after lunch, I think, by the time we really got started.
It was. Yeah.
Yeah. And because of all of the delay of the confusion over, you know, us thinking it, and, you know, so, like, he traded dockets with Judge Burt, so none of the clerks knew who to send where, and somebody else was in line before us, and they took a little bit longer than they were supposed to, you know, in terms of being at the start of the day on the docket in front of Judge Day. So, I mean, and it was like our trial was being heard by Judge Day in Judge Burt's courtroom, along with Judge Burt's other cases, and everybody who was supposed to be heard by Judge Day in Judge Day's courtroom was being heard by Judge Burt in Judge Day's courtroom. It was very, very confusing. The clerks were losing their minds, like I said. So Allison began giving testimony, and I mean, some of the stuff that, like, some of the things that she brought up, you know, and she gave like a day and a half, essentially a day and a half of testimony. And that's just on direct testimony, and it was not finished, right? And she had that binder so meticulously organized. It was like she's a forensic anthropologist, right? Looking into this, and just every single piece of evidence followed from the next and built the case piece by piece, right? None of it was out of sequence. It was like the perfect breadcrumb trail of the evidence, essentially establishing connections between Sam Maggs and the person, Sam Maggs of the Mary Sue, who was on the ground at Calgary Expo, and the person in Ontario who happened to be her longtime friend and collaborator professionally, who was the one who kicked off the Twitter storm with a photo that didn't exist anywhere on the internet, that we didn't take, that could only have been taken at the Calgary Expo, but was tweeted by this person in Ontario, like, just who is affiliated with Sam Maggs, and all of these connections, right? So she's building this massive case of circumstantial evidence, right? I honestly think that if this case was to a beyond a reasonable doubt standard, we'd have a reasonable chance of winning. But it's not to a reasonable doubt. It's actually to a preponderance of evidence. And we have so much evidence, and she's just laying it all out, and she's just laying it all fucking out. And every single objection, like, because all of the contested evidence, Harry successfully argued early in the day, let's take each piece of contested evidence as it comes, right? So Allison's evidence binder and Harry's evidence binder stayed the same, and all of the contested evidence was removed from the judge's binder and the defense binder, and every time they came to a page that wasn't included in that, they essentially showed it to the judge and said, will you admit this into evidence? And every single time the judge says, yeah, I'll consider it. Yeah, no. And Chu sometimes said it's prejudicial, and the judge said, I think that I am capable of considering the evidence within the context and not be prejudiced by it. So there you go. Right. So it was win all the way down, the way down.
There was one part of the whole thing that was absolutely my favorite, though. It was when she was talking about being like escorted out, right? When they were saying, you're being kicked out. And at one point, like she's explaining how they didn't say, and he said, did they tell you what it is they're kicking you out for? And she was trying to explain, and then he clarifies. He's like, no, like, did they tell you what behavior you did was harassment? And then everything is kind of silent for a second, and then she's just like, no. And then he looks over and he starts writing something down. And that was my favorite moment, because it was just the judge basically helping her case along, being like, did they tell you what you did that was supposed to have been harassment? Like, Harry was trying to ask the hardball questions to get everything out, but that was the moment when the judge put out his own, and it was just very impressive. There actually had to be a short recess after that.
Yeah. And what I found interesting too, and one of the things, right, is that, like, some of Allison's evidence was, she presented email exchanges with the person that she had to be in touch with to clarify the name of the, to be put on the booth. And, and she was trying to figure out, like, okay, what am I going to name this booth? Right. And she waited until after she had it funded that the Honey Badgers were going to be there to request to have the name of the booth be made Honey Badger Brigade. She registered under Honey Badger Brigade and honeybadgerbrigade.com and honeybadgersradio@gmail.com or whatever, right? But she wasn't sure about the name until she knew she was going to get us there. And then by then, it was not just a simple thing of just logging into her exhibitor account and changing the name. She actually had to request the name change because they'd have to print out different things. And so she requested the name change, and she requested from her Xenospora account, and the guy replied to the Honey Badgers radio account and said, yeah, no, that's no problem. Same with the space funnel thing, the fire marshal's certification for it and everything else, right? They requested that information. She forwarded it from her Xenospora account, and they replied to her Honey Badgers radio account. So, they knew that Xenospora and Honey Badgers radio and Allison Tiemann were all one thing. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, she even put in, the request to live stream. She actually, from in the booth, she requested official permission from the, whoever was in charge of that. Is it okay if we live stream from within our booth? And the guy replied, yeah, no, that's perfectly fine as long as you're not pointing your camera outside of the booth And as long as you're not going to use the footage for commercial purposes, thank you so much for asking. Very few people actually do. Right? So she's setting up this story of, and it's not a fictional story. She's setting up all the evidence of how rule conscious she is, of how she absolutely goes out of her way to make sure what's okay and what's not before she does anything.
Yeah, and double checks often.
Complies with all of the rules to, even to the point where like normal people wouldn't care or wouldn't even think of asking what the rules are.
Yeah, and presented written and video evidence, and then the judge is like, do we need to watch the whole video? I think we've got the typed parts here. That's good enough. We don't need to go through the whole thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, it was essentially, he asked, why do you want us to listen to the entire hour-long panel discussion? And she said, because I want you to see, or I want you to understand that what I did was not out of line. It's not like I got up and behaved that way in a monastery where everybody else has taken a vow of silence. Essentially, I was acting the way everybody else was. Yeah. Right. And so I was not being out of place. I wasn't doing anything that other people weren't also doing. And he said, well, I don't think I need to hear that. I don't think I need to hear the whole thing. And then Harry just said, well, we'd like to reserve the right to play the entire thing upon reply if that particular issue is challenged on cross-examination, right? So if Chu comes after Allison in cross-examination, says, but you were being disruptive, but you were being engaging in harassment, then we get to make Chu listen to the entire fucking thing, right? And the judge. Because she wasn't, and she obviously wasn't. And I think the judge totally saw that. So
I could just imagine how thrilled the judge is gonna be if he has to listen to an hour-long discussion on women into comics.
Yeah.
The panelists are whining about being asked if they have boyfriends.
Yeah. I agree.
Not accepted
I agree.
in comics because that guys want to know if you have a boyfriend. Gee, I wonder why you might want to know that. I'm gonna interrupt this though with one. We do have a super chat. French Honey Badger gave us $5 and says, "I will not pardon your French, Karen." And I want to also point out. Let's see, that was seconded in that live chat by Joshimo, who gave us a little arrow up towards it after it was posted.
Well, there you go. Well, you can choose to pardon it or not, but it's my French and I'll do what I want with it. Thank you.
There you go.
I do what I want. I do what I want. My French.
But okay, so after the second day of testimony, and we'd only just so Allison is sort of masterfully she's just given this extremely detailed account, and she's pulled all of this stuff, right? So afternoon of the second day, she's going through all of the articles that picked up the Mary Sue story, right? And there's, I don't know, 10 or 12 of them, right? And she's describing, these are all the articles that sort of repeated the allegations that were made in the Mary Sue completely uncritically, that were promoted by the Calgary Echo, completely uncritically. And then I, made a little note and I handed it to Harry, and because it's a question that needed to be asked, are any of these industry publications, right? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, well, what would you, how does that impact things? And she's like, well, because these are places where my comic book might have been reviewed, right? But they aren't going to touch me now. This is my reputation. This now is, I'm going to try and paraphrase it as powerfully as she did. This now is my reputation to anyone with a computer and an internet connection. This. this here, right?
Yeah,
These allegations.
When you Google my name, this is the first thing you're going to find.
Yeah, and this is maybe all you're going to find, because it's going to take up the first 3 pages, right? And you're not going to look any further. And so essentially that was like a massively powerful moment. And then she brought in the Calgary Expo tweeting the Mary Sue's article. She brought in a screen grab of or a PDF of the archive.is. And this was hilarious, right? Because she says, okay, she's trying to, because the Chu was like, this hasn't been authenticated, right? She said, and it's contested. And she says, well, I didn't have it. I only discovered it after the deadline, right? And the judge was like, well, explain why it's relevant and what it actually says. And it describes how archive.is works, and that every time you feed the URL, right? She says, if you look at that URL and you feed that in to that website, and then Harry's like, URL, I don't know what that is, right? And Harry says, what's a URL, right? And what he's asking, and this is the hilarious thing, what he's asking is, what on this page am I supposed to be looking at, right? And so the appropriate answer for anyone for a normie would be, that thing at the top where you put in www.whatever.com, right? That's a URL, right? But Allison says, well, it's an abbreviation for Universal Resource Locator, and she goes into this like highly technical description of, all what a URL is and what it does and blah blah blah, and I'm just like, I'm kind of laughing behind my hand, right, as I'm trying to get up to go and point to Harry, here's the thing on the page that is the URL. Here's what you're supposed to be looking at. Here's what you're talking about. Right. So I'm trying to bypass this bizarre, issue of counsel and witness speaking 2 completely different fucking languages. Right. And talking past each other. And I start to snicker. And then the judge says, it's not polite to laugh at old people just because they don't know what a URL is. And I look up and I just feel my face just go totally hot. I look up at him and he's smiling at me. And then I just kept on smiling behind my hand, and I gave him a little bit of a nod, and I pointed out to Harry, and then the judge said, for the record, right? Because everything's just audio recorded. He said, for the record, I was being a bit jocular there, for anybody who's typing up the transcript, right? So we get it sorted out that that's what a URL is, and she explains how every time somebody feeds the URL for the tweet into archive.is, it spits back a picture of what's there at that URL. And so what we know is, we don't know exactly when the tweet was deleted, but we know it was deleted between this snapshot that shows the tweet and this one that shows error 404, page not found, right? And then Chu stands up and says, now she's pretending to be some kind of tech expert, right? She's trying to be an IT expert. She's positioning herself as somebody who's an expert at, internet and all of this stuff, right? And so then Harry asks her to explain how long she's been on the internet. And she's like, 12 years or something like that, right? And then she says, well, no, that's not right, because it wasn't the internet back then. It was actually like HTML or no, because the HTML protocol hadn't actually been, developed yet, and so it was all blah 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 blah. She's describing like Usenet and the ARPANET and all of this other shit, right? So it wasn't really the internet as we know it, but I was on there, and we were using this, that, and the other to communicate with each other, and so by the time she was done, essentially giving her credentials as to how the internet works and how computers work and how code works and all of that, and how many social media accounts she's managed and how many websites she's built and the whole bit over her time on the internet before it was the internet, and since, Chu's objection was just completely demolished. It was just a thing of beauty to watch. I mean, it was like the URL thing where she's like, it's Universal Resource Locator, and here's how it works, right? That was like the perfect preamble into her giving her credentials.
It's like every time she opens her mouth, she kills the, no, they really meant it when they said they were fake nerd girls, is because they really are fake nerd girls.
Yeah.
Every time she opens her mouth, she buries that just a little bit more.
So, I mean, like, by the end of the second day, I think that the defense realized that, I mean, I think that they had to have realized that they had no case, but I think that they might have been under the impression that they could charm the judge, or that that we didn't have a case or would be unable to convincingly present the case. And in particular, I think that part of that was, I have to say part of it has to do with Harry, because Harry has this way about him. He's a very Matlock, Columbo style, the chicken lawyer from Futurama style lawyer, where he seems very, very benign and almost a little bit quaint and not that bright, but he's extremely shrewd, and then he comes in and delivers the death blow just absolutely mercilessly, and he looks completely benign and magnanimous when he does it, almost like it's accidental, that he's accidentally asking the pertinent question, right? That accidentally wins the case, type thing. So I think that the opposition, the defense, underestimated what we had, and maybe because they weren't paying that much attention to what we had, and so by the time the third morning rolled around, oh my God! But one of the interesting things that happened, and we're not privy to what happened within this, but just after lunch on the second day, Judge Day said, I was just having lunch with a judge from Edmonton who's in town for a few days, and he's the second most senior judge in Alberta, and I was discussing this case because it's an extremely rare case, injurious falsehood is just not a commonly used tort, mainly because there's very, very meager sums of money involved, and it's very difficult to demonstrate. And by the time you've spent the money to demonstrate it, you've essentially spent more than you'd get. So it's very, very rarely used. Few judges have ever heard a case. That's why he actually took the case from Judge Burt, was because she'd never adjudicated an injurious falsehood case, and he had to do a whole bunch of reading in order to even rule on the summary dismissal motion. So essentially, he was acquainted with the details of the case, and he was also acquainted with the nature of injurious falsehood as a tort, and she was not. So she was like, yeah, no, I'm happy to offload this bullshit onto you. But he essentially had this judge, Judge, what was his name? Shurik, had offered, without prejudice and in private, to essentially sit down with the parties in a case conference setting and see if he couldn't help them in hashing out some kind of settlement. And so, of course, we agreed to that, and Chu agreed to that, and Allison and Harry and Chu and his clients went and sat down with Judge Shurik for, 2 hours or something like that at the end of day 2 to try and mediate some kind of settlement. And I don't know, I'm gonna let Prim describe what happened when the doors opened and people started filing out of the courtroom, and it was already like 6:30 or something like that. The security guards were there in the hallway
God.
because the courthouse had closed, and they're just like, yeah, we have to be here until you guys get the fuck out, because it's like, yeah.
Well, all of a
ahead.
sudden, we see in the corner of the hallway, Allison and Icebrook had kind of snuck off together and were talking with each other, and we're all just kind of like, should that be happening? That maybe doesn't seem like the best thing to be happening. I know Jonathan was like, what are they doing over there? And then Karen at one point eventually just walked straight over to the security guards and was like, hey, can you go over and split those two up? Can you just like make up some excuse that we have to shut down the hallways now to get them apart? Because this is not okay. They shouldn't be talking alone. Harry should be at least with her. Yeah, so we finally got them separated, and that was a really interesting thing. And, it was actually really interesting even what happened before that, because I was totally curious to see what was going to happen with this second judge. I thought that would have been a really interesting thing to see, but it seemed like Chu was really not okay about that. He's like, no, like this should be left to only the people involved in the case. The clerk even looked me dead in the eye and said, you can come in if you want to. And I should have, because I should have just said, no, the clerk said it's okay. I'm going to listen to him, thanks. But no, I didn't.
Well,
in the end.
Well, what I think, and I think it's probably best that we weren't there, because there's some things that we might want to divulge that, we can't, because it is privileged what happened in there, in terms of, or at least in terms of, the parties or representatives of the parties divulging any
That's
of
fair.
that. But I will say that Allison shot out of the courtroom. Icebrook was running at her heels. They ended up down at the end of the hall. She was obviously kind of yelling at him. And Chu and Henkelman went in the exact opposite direction toward the elevators, and they were standing there waiting. And waiting and waiting. And then the one security guard got relieved by two security guards. The one female security guard got relieved by two male security guards. And I asked them, yeah, go break them up. Like, if you don't, we're never going to leave. I'm not going near them. I'm not getting in between them, because that's just not something I'm prepared to do.
No.
Right. And so, but they'll listen to you. Right. And so they went and they did that. And as Icebrook and Allison were walking back towards us and then past us toward the elevator, Icebrook was saying, let's get together at 8 tomorrow morning and discuss it. Yeah. And she's like, yeah, okay. And off we all go. And then that night, Allison had this massive kind of epiphany regarding whether she really needs to, regarding just costs, benefits, and risks, right? And the fact that really the party with the most to lose here is not her.
Right.
So she had this epiphany that night. And so in the morning, she didn't show up at 8 o'clock. And, who showed up was Excalibur, who's one of our patrons. He showed up early, and claimed the conference room for us. That's the room with all of the chairs and the big table, which was good because Allison had completely destroyed her evidence binders during the case conference with the other judge, because she was looking through them. And like these binders, these are 4-inch binders, and they're overstuffed with pages, right? So even just turning the page, if you don't do it perfectly and carefully, you're losing the pages jumping out of the rings, right? And so she completely mangled her evidence binders, and so we get there at 9 o'clock, or just before 9, and she's at the table in the conference room, and she's so slamming things around. Morning. Oh, she was so fucking like bitchy, right? And she's slamming shit around, and she's like tapping the papers together really hard on the table, and she's like, and then she'd pause and she'd start ranting, and then I'd be like, Allison, your binders, right? And she'd be like, eh. And then she'd go and start like putting the papers in again, right? And Harry was in the bathroom, right? So it was just me and Allison and some of the witnesses in the conference room. The other people were across the hall in the witness waiting room, or whatever it's called. And so Chew sticks his head in the door. He knocks, and then he opens the door a little bit, and he sticks his head kind of in, and he says, "Is Harry here?" And Allison yells, "No,
no!" and slams the door in his face.
And he says, and Chew says,
"Oh right, yeah.
Could you send him across the hall to us when he gets?" And she just slams the door in his face, mid-sentence, okay? And then, like, literally 2 minutes later, Icebrook pokes his head in. And he says, "Allison, do you have time to have a word?" And she says,
"No, I don't.
No, I'm sorting out my binders, my evidence." And she slams the door in his face, right? It was fucking hilarious. And then she's working on it, and Harry comes along, and I tell Harry, Chew was asking if you'd head over there and give them a word. And so Harry goes over there, and then he comes back a couple minutes later, and he says, "We want to talk settlement." And she just fucking lost it. She
ran into their room, threw open the door.
Shit. So the doors are open, right? One's right across the hall from the other. The doors are wide open. And she slams her stuff down, and she marches over there with her fists balled at her side, and she just starts reaming them out, right? And she's like, she's not swearing or anything, but she's just like saying, "I don't know if you guys know this, but you have way more to lose than me. Everything I had to lose, you guys took from me 2.5 years ago, right? And you know what? Blah, 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 blah," right? And then she just charges back into the conference room and starts sorting her papers again. And then she stops, and she looks up, and she just like slams her stuff down again. And she charges back in there, and she goes, "And another thing, you can go ahead if you win and come after costs. You can try and take my Badger Cave, but I guarantee you I will have a 1,000 people lined up to give me money to pay those costs, blah, 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 blah," right? Like, I will have it funded in a day, right? And they were just like, holy fuck, right? I don't know what to do with this shit, right? And the whole time, Hankelman, I think it was basically when she said, "Everything you took from me, everything you could take from me, you took from me 2.5 years ago." Hankelman starts apologizing. He's like, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Right? And then it was like this weird thing, because after she calmed down and she went back in and she started talking to them, Hankelman was actually being somewhat reasonable, and Icebrook was being he was not going to budge on a single fucking thing. It was like not a single fucking thing. And I went in there, And because Allison was getting really, really annoyed by Icebrook not budging on anything. And I just put my hand on her shoulder and I said, you do realize that we could settle with Calgary Expo and continue the litigation against the Mary Sue all by themselves. And then I just watched as Icebrook's balls just like shriveled up and tried to crawl back up inside his body. And all of a sudden he's like, oh, no. Right? And we can't discuss any of the terms, but the attitude completely changed when, and Allison said, can we do that? And Chu, being an officer of the court, acting in his official capacity, had to actually come out and say, yeah, you can, right? Just because they have the same lawyer doesn't mean they aren't two separate clients. So yeah, it was, but things have stalled. Like it's almost like they just have a very short attention span, or maybe like I think that it was a time wasting endeavor, but this trial was going to take another 3 days regardless of what happened.
Yeah.
Right? Even if we had done the entire third day had not been essentially wasted in trying to negotiate a settlement, that isn't going to happen. You're still looking at, like, because of the complexity of things, you're still looking at least 3 more days. It was still going to go to an additional several days of trial, right? So I don't know why. I don't know why they thought it would be a good idea. If that's what they were trying to do, is waste our time. It really didn't amount to much. So
I don't know. Maybe they thought you'd run out of money or something.
It's really hard to tell. Well, because of all of the other mistakes that you described and everything. Yeah, they may really think that what they tried to latch onto as a reason to continue litigation is actually going to be of some value to them. They may really think that they can walk into court with that and actually override all of the evidence and all of the ways in which they have made the judge really unsympathetic to them, and all of the history of this case with, one tweet that was up for a couple of seconds was made a mistaken assessment of what it meant that we were conciliatory and agreeable in the settlement room to whatever terms Allison had laid out, and it was like, when I heard we were going back and that was the reason, I'm like, these guys are idiots. They cannot possibly actually think that's gonna work. But
it's not the reason.
They could think that's gonna work.
They could think it's gonna work, but that's not the reason we're going back to court. The reason we're going back to court is that they won't give us what we want.
Right, but they're using that as their excuse, which is really dumb because it's not going to get them anywhere.
Actually, they're not. They're not using it as their excuse to go back to court. They're actually trying to use it as leverage to force us to settle for terms that are not amenable to us.
No. That's what I'm saying. They're using that as their excuse to not agree to what they had verbally agreed to in the conference room.
Here's the thing, Hannah. They verbally agreed to certain things. Allison essentially said, this is not the entire thing, right? I will provide my other terms, right? Once I have made assessments of, certain things, but these are going to be things that you're going to have to give me, right? In addition to the other things that I will bring to you later. So, I mean, it wasn't that they had agreed to specific things that that then they reneged on. It's just that it was essentially a settlement negotiation that was kind of put down in the middle before Allison had even, tallied her monetary losses and things like that. Like none of that was really discussed. There were some things that she was like, these are the things that you're going to need to give me if we're going to continue to discuss a settlement. And they said, yes, we'll give you those things and we'll continue to discuss it. And then they essentially said, well, those things, right, that you held up as the things that are the deal breakers, and that if
the non-negotiables,
the non-negotiables, now everything's non-negotiable, and we're not going to give you one thing more. And so essentially that's where we're at. They essentially assumed that the settlement negotiations were done the moment that, at the end of day in person. And no, they weren't. They knew they weren't. So that's really, so they haven't reneged on anything. They have just essentially said, well, we promised you this, we promised you that, and that should be good enough. And so we're not going to talk about anything else. So, I mean, that's really, really what it is. It's not that they've gone back on anything that they promised, because they haven't, and I'll give them that. So,
well, that's good. Although I still think that the idea of using that's just not, it's just not gonna. They don't really have a leg to stand on there.
Oh, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. There's actually more than one legal defense against that tweet being defamatory. I mean, there are multiple affirmative defenses, and they all fit, right? Because it was fair comment, and it was fair comment in terms of using a colloquialism to describe a situation. And it was...
Well, hey, I mean, he could have just been talking about his favorite basketball team for something. I don't know. Who can say otherwise, right? Like, all he said was, we won.
And and how is it defamatory? Right?
Yeah, no doubt.
I mean, is it going to be defamatory when the judge decides in our favor? Are they going to sue the judge for defamation?
And then the other question is, what damages did they actually, what real damages could they lay out and say this happened because of that? And they don't have anything. There isn't somebody that didn't do business with them because of that. There isn't anything that happened because of that. They didn't lose a dime because of that. So it's all bull. But I think we've pretty much gone over everything that there is to go over with respect to what has happened and what is there's probably
more that I could think of, but
unfortunately there's not a whole lot I can talk about because I'm not privy to the vast majority of what happened because I wasn't in the courtroom. I was out in the hallway. So and I have a set of things that I can talk about, but not until I'm in the courtroom. So that's kind of where we are now. I don't know, is there anything, Prim, that you wanted to add that Karen had not mentioned or described?
I think we covered most of the really important things. I know I had written down some notes before, but I think most of the important ones we definitely covered those.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'm going to repeat the earlier shill. I know it's early. Based on when they have our date set up so far, but we have asked for an earlier date, so there may be an upcoming update regarding that. But and we don't know. We can't plan ahead necessarily and say, well, we're gonna wait until we know more because we don't know more. So we've already put up the fundraiser at feedthebadger.com. It is the featured project, the featured project, and so if you go to feedthebadger.com, you should be able to see it. I've dropped the page because my computer didn't like putting everything on display that I had open, so I had to close that. But it was something to the effect of help us infiltrate the Calgary court system again, or something like that. And it's basically we need to get the witnesses back to Calgary for one more round. We've got it one more time, I think, to jump into that ring with that fancy schmancy New York lawyer who's, so sophisticated and slick.
He's
and
so
he keeps
sophisticated,
pissing off the judge.
He's so sophisticated he can wear 2 pairs of pants.
Yeah.
There you go.
But and that's it. That's hopefully that'll settle things once and for all. I cannot imagine it's going to go much longer than that. This isn't like the cases I've been involved with in the past. Nobody's accused of beating anybody up from across town or anything like that. So, with that, I think we are going to end the show. So I would like to thank everybody that is listening tonight. I'd like to thank my co-hosts and to everyone who makes Honey Badger live streams happen. Thank you very much. Especially, again, the people that have to go through and listen to our chatter and pick out the best parts. Tonight, it's not going to be quite as long, so they'll have an easier night of it. But thank you all, and good night.